He keeps a heavy metal flashlight in his truck, another in the kitchen drawer, and a third on the nightstand. Not the cheap plastic kind you buy at a supermarket checkout. The kind of flashlight that feels like a weapon, heavy enough to break glass, cold and absolute in the hand. His father used to hand him something exactly like it and say, "Hold the flashlight." And he would stand there, illuminating the entire engine bay like a military operation, only to hear, "Not there, here. Are you even looking?" He grew up holding the light steady while angry adults cursed at broken machinery. Now he is in his 50s. The flashlights are his. They sit waiting for the power to drop, for the storm to hit, for the grid to stutter. He doesn't panic when the lights go out. He just reaches into the dark, finds the heavy metal cylinder, and clicks it on. He is already prepared. Everyone thinks the defining feature of his youth was the music, or the absent parents, or the sudden explosion of divorce. But there was something larger, a hum in the atmosphere that nobody really talked about, but absolutely everyone felt. The background noise of nuclear threat. The Cold War was not just a geopolitical standoff on the evening news. It was the psychological weather of his childhood. The 1970s and 1980s were not gentle decades. He walked past faded yellow fallout shelter signs bolted to brick walls on his way to elementary school. He sat under his desk during drills, staring at the linoleum floor, perfectly aware even at 9 years old that a wooden desk was not going to stop a blast radius. He lived with the constant, ambient understanding that the world as he knew it could be erased on a random Tuesday afternoon, and yet the expectation was that he still needed to finish his math worksheet before dinner. You cannot overstate what it does to a developing mind to hold those two realities simultaneously. The world might end, but you still have to take out the trash. What develops in that environment is not emotional suppression, it is emotional regulation. The capacity to experience something difficult, something existentially terrifying, and remain entirely functional. You observe your own reactions with some distance and make decisions based on what is actually in front of you rather than what you are feeling in the moment. Modern clinical psychology largely confirms that this framework works, noting that the foundations of cognitive behavioral therapy map almost directly onto this exact kind of Stoic practice. He didn't read ancient philosophy as a child, but he developed the operating system anyway because the environment demanded it. He learned early to separate what was in his control from what was completely out of his hands. The threat of global annihilation was out of his hands. The lawnmower engine that wouldn't start was in his control. So he fixed the mower. The researchers who look back at this generation are finding things that contradict every warning issued by the experts during those years. They analyzed cognitive ability test scores from over 730,000 male military conscripts born between 1962 and 1991. The results showed that IQ scores reached their absolute historical peak for men born around 1975, exactly in the middle of Generation X. After that cohort, the scores began declining by about 0.2 points per year. This was not a genetic accident. It was deeply environmental. His generation lived in a specific cognitive Goldilocks zone. The removal of lead from gasoline and paint contributed approximately 4 to 5 IQ points to the population, a one-time biological upgrade. But beyond chemistry, it was the structural demands of his daily life. Kids who came home to empty houses let themselves in, made their own food, and figured out their own problems. Every afternoon alone was, in a real neurological sense, doing reps. Unsupervised time built cognitive reserve, acting as an inoculating stressor. It provided enough challenge to stimulate growth without causing permanent damage. In the absence of ready answers, his intellect was forced to evolve. There's a guy named Mark. Let's talk about Mark. Mark is 54. He lives alone in a house that looks completely ordinary from the street. But down in his basement, there are metal shelves organized with a precision that borders on the clinical. Water, canned goods, batteries, hand-crank radios, a meticulously categorized medical kit. People who catch a glimpse of it might make a joke about him being a prepper waiting for the apocalypse. Mark usually just laughs it off with a dry comment. But the shelves are not a joke, and they are not really about the end of the world. We will come back to Mark, because what he is actually storing on those heavy steel racks has very little to do with surviving a disaster. You can look at the men of this era and divide them by how they adapted to that underlying hum of instability they grew up in. There is the man who became entirely self-reliant physically. He buys tools that last, avoids anything with a microchip if a mechanical version exists, and trusts a heavy cast iron skillet more than any modern non-stick marketing. Then there is the man who adapted mentally, developing a deep, reflexive skepticism of authority. He watched institutions sell certainty like used cars. He watched the people who talked loudly about values quietly revise their definitions under pressure. He watched governments conduct foreign policy through sustained, documented lying. And finally, there is the man who internalized the whole thing into a preference for profound silence. A man who finds large gatherings exhausting in a way he has never been able to fully articulate to the people who keep inviting him. The evolutionary mismatch framework explains this last man perfectly, though he would probably hate the academic phrasing. General intelligence evolved as an adaptation for solving novel problems in unfamiliar environments. Individuals with higher cognitive capacity are better equipped to navigate those novel environments independently, meaning they need the tribal safety net significantly less. When a highly intelligent person spends time alone, they are doing something evolutionarily meaningful. They are solving the problems their brain is specifically wired for. Socializing at the frequency the average brain requires actually interrupts that process, pulling cognitive resources away from satisfying work. For high IQ people, the effect of frequent social interaction on life satisfaction is negative. The data came from a long-term survey of 15,000 adults, and the finding was statistically significant. So when this man prefers to stay home, he is not damaged. He is not antisocial. He is operating on an evolutionary signature of a mind at the upper end of the distribution. Solitude is not an absence for him. Solitude is an occupied environment. The question was never why he expects things to eventually break down. The deeper question is what else he refused to show while he was waiting for the breakdown to happen. Because he doesn't show pain until it becomes a mechanical failure, and he doesn't show fear until it translates into anger, his self-regulation is private, physical, and based entirely on competence. He calms down by doing something he can control, whether that is repairing a broken fence or spending 16 hours tending ribs on a smoker until they come out right. That is where his nervous system finds proof, in being demonstrably capable. But there is another outlet, one that the adults in his youth completely misunderstood: the music. He listened to heavy metal, progressive rock, and thrash. The adults held congressional hearings and put warning labels on the albums. They assumed the music was making him dangerous and troubled. They were spectacularly wrong. The loud, structured intensity provided an emotional catharsis that simpler music simply could not match. It absorbed the pressure without asking anything in return. The distorted guitars and harsh vocals mimicked acoustic threat signals, triggering the brain's alarm system, but its prefrontal cortex would override it, transforming the threat signal into a pleasurable experience of power and control. Enjoying that music is a cognitively demanding process, requiring executive function. The music didn't create the pressure, it gave the pressure a necessary container. It gave the outsider a tribe that did not require him to become cheerful or socially harmless. He was formed by physical objects that required real-time and serious attention. He read actual manuals because that was the only way to learn how a machine worked. He mapped routes on paper and navigated across cities from memory. He read physical books page by page, which built his working memory capacity, enhanced his focus, and physically altered his brain structure, thickening the neural fibers connecting the left and right hemispheres. He grew up doing the cognitively expensive version of learning because it was all that was available. And then the world shifted completely. The internet arrived. He became a digital immigrant, having to learn the new system as an adult and graft it onto an already mature analog brain. This sequence produced a cognitive flexibility that purely digital minds simply cannot replicate. He knows, in a way that younger generations cannot, that the current organizing system is not permanent. He crossed the border between analog and digital in his actual lived experience, and that specific knowledge produces a tolerance for ambiguity that is extremely difficult to train into adults. Let's look at Mark's basement again. The shelves of supplies, the heavy radios, the carefully maintained tools. Mark is not preparing for a nuclear winter anymore. The Cold War ended decades ago. What Mark is storing on those shelves is a physical manifestation of structure. In a fully independent life, structure is what replaces everything else. It keeps things from accelerating out of control when motivation fails. When Mark organizes his emergency supplies, he is not operating out of fear. He is engaging in a ritual of control. The world outside is noisy, chaotic, and increasingly abstract, governed by algorithms and invisible data systems that change their rules every week. The canned goods are tangible. The batteries have a measurable, reliable charge. The radio has physical dials that provide tactile feedback. Mark is maintaining a system that he can touch, repair, and absolutely rely on. He is exercising the exact same cognitive architecture he built when he was 11 years old, staring at a fallout shelter sign and deciding to just focus on fixing his bicycle chain so he could ride home. He is handling it. But there is a real risk in this kind of life that doesn't get enough attention. It is the drift. It happens gradually, quietly, in ways that feel completely normal while they are happening. Meals get simpler, then careless. Sleep shifts a little, then a lot. Because there is no external structure and no one there to reflect his life back at him, nothing ever feels explicitly wrong. His normal just moves. A fully self-managed life can feel stable, even when it is slowly, quietly narrowing. He can go 11 days without a meaningful conversation, notice it briefly, and file it under fine. Not because he is in denial, but because the system he built doesn't have a meter designed for that particular measurement. The warning light simply doesn't come on. A significant number of men from his generation lack basic companionship. They report feeling isolated, and their distress response roots through solitary routines and analog objects, meaning they leave absolutely no digital traces for modern intervention systems to catch. They are breaking down in a format no modern surveillance architecture was built to see. The friendships these men have often last 20 or 30 years, holding on to the same guys from school, from their first real job, or from a neighborhood that barely exists anymore. But the connection can easily fade into a group chat nobody reads. It exists, inactive, like a good tool sitting on a garage workbench. Both men just assume it is still there, but years go by without a concrete reason to reach out. If you are the guy watching this right now, sitting in a quiet house on a weeknight, I am not going to tell you to overhaul your entire social life or join a club. That is not how you operate, and we both know it. But pick up your phone. Send a short text to the guy you haven't talked to in 2 years. Not a long emotional message, just something small. One text, frictionless enough that you actually do it. Small regular contact beats big occasional contact every single time. Someone just has to pick up the line. If this hit a little close to home, subscribe or drop a comment about the oldest piece of gear you still keep running. Just make the connection. The future is not going to slow down for anyone. It will arrive with a mandatory subscription plan and a polished promise to make everything easier while quietly making everyone more dependent. It will relentlessly punish people who cannot think independently, who cannot sit calmly with uncertainty, and who cannot separate signal from noise. But this man remembers exactly what it felt like to not know something immediately. He remembers that true curiosity always had friction. He survived the ambient threat of a war that never turned hot by learning to keep his head down, process the anxiety silently, and build things that actually work. He stands in his kitchen before sunrise, making coffee exactly the way he prefers it, not posting anything, not proving anything to an audience. He is just a man with a working mind and a few precious minutes of quiet before the world starts demanding things again. He reaches out in the dark. He finds the heavy metal flashlight. He clicks it on. The beam cuts through the darkness, steady and blindingly bright. He holds the light. He has always held the light.